The Pacific Northwest has been the last area in the continental United States to be developed, which means that most of our structures here have been borrowed from other parts of the country. Well, our urban spaceman, Pat Burke, answers the question, what is uniquely Pacific Northwest architecture?
For the last 30 or 40 years, architects and their critics in the Pacific Northwest have been debating the whole issue of what is Pacific Northwest architecture, or if indeed we have any at all. As you walk around the neighborhoods in the Pacific Northwest, you see a lot of homes and houses that are extremely well built, but they might as well be anywhere, in Salem, Massachusetts, or in San Jose, California, because they tell us very little about our building traditions, our climate, and our environment. In the last few years, the technology of wood treatment in construction has advanced tremendously, so we have now a whole variety and dramatic change on the possibilities of wood in architecture. Wherever one stands on the debate over what is Northwest architecture, most people agree that it's a house made of wood, that it has to relate to the natural terrain in some way. It has to say something unique about this region and yet offer a sense of shelter. One of the great practitioners of Northwest architecture is Ralph Anderson. Ralph, when you got started after the war, what type of houses were architects doing then?
The Bauhaus school, very austere, cool, articulate, rectangular, lineal type structures, and I think it was kind of a reaction against the traditional architecture that had predominated the country for years. And this is sort of right after the war, and there was no building done during the war, so there was this big push to do all these fresh, crisp, cool buildings. And in fact, my first house was basically a glass box in a lovely setting, but after living in it for a couple of years, I decided that somehow this didn't relate to the Northwest. It was too vulnerable, and in the wintertime you were exposed to all the, when all the trees had lost their leaves, and when the frost had arrived and the rhododendrons were looking very sick. It wasn't a very pleasant scene. I was always looking for corners to crawl into. So then I became very interested in what then had been called the Northwest style, and I think had been, I would say, Beluski, John Yon, and then Paul Ferry and Paul Kirk had done some of these houses before the war, and they seemed to be the natural houses for this area. They seemed to fit into the terrain. They had a heavy, strong roof line, a protective roof. They sort of a cap. They used natural wood. They were Western frame construction, which was by far the least expensive way to build a house, and it seemed like a very logical, honest, straightforward approach to the architecture of the Northwest.
You were talking about architects that work in the Northwest idiom that have a vocabulary of forms to deal with and to create a Northwest architecture. What do you think that vocabulary is?
Well, first of all, I think you're dealing with Western frame stick construction. You're dealing with a strong, protective roof, which is and the most attractive and probably the most logical is shingles and shake. You're dealing with the wood and the expression of the use of wood. You know the house is Western frame. You can see and that's repeated in probably the window modulation. You can see the rafters are quite often exposed, the basic structure. You know how it's put together. It's a very obvious, it's a very straightforward, honest approach. You're not trying to make it look like a concrete house or a brick house. It's a wood house, and it's a stick house that has that is using wood in a very honest and in a straightforward, economical manner.
Is the roof then the dominant design element, you think?
I would say the roof as a protective, I would say would be the strongest element. We have very beautiful vegetation. We have very strong natural terrains, and I think the architecture should become part of that and not try to compete with it.
Northwest architecture is one of the great contributions from our part of the country. It offers us not only a physical and psychological protection from the elements, but a great sense of the natural world around us. And that, after all, is what architecture is supposed to be all about.